She carried an injured Apache leader through Bandit territory. Next day, he revealed who he really was. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin the story. The sun was setting over the rugged desert, casting long shadows over the dry land. Sarah had been riding her horse for hours, the heat of the day still lingering in the air. She had no particular destination in mind, but the emptiness of the desert had always been a comfort to her. A place where she could think, escape the noise of the world, and focus on the simple task of surviving. But today, something was different. As she rode past a large boulder, something caught her eye. It was a man, lying motionless on the ground. His dark hair was matted with blood, and his body was covered in dirt. At first, she thought he might be dead, but as she dismounted and moved closer, she saw the faint rise and fall of his chest. She hesitated for a moment, the desert's harsh silence pressing down on her. He was Apache, that much was clear from his clothing and the war paint still visible on his face. But what was an Apache warrior doing out here, alone and badly injured? And why had no one come to his aid? Sarah's mind raced, but her instincts took over. She couldn't just leave him here. With a steady hand, she reached down and gently checked his pulse. It was weak, but still there. She knew she had to act quickly. With all her strength, she hoisted him onto her horse, adjusting his position as carefully as she could. She set off, her heart pounding in her chest. The man's condition was dire, and she knew she had to get him to safety. As she rode, she glanced over at his unconscious face. There was something about him that seemed familiar, but she couldn't place it. Who was he? And why had he been left to die in the desert? She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. As the hours passed, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the air grew cooler. She rode through the night, her horse's hooves clattering against the rocky ground. Her body ached from the strain, but she pushed forward, determined to save him. Finally, as dawn broke, she saw a small campfire in the distance. It was a group of Apache, their faces solemn and watchful. She urged her horse toward them, her heart racing. She had no idea how they would react to her bringing one of their own people back, especially one who was clearly injured. As she neared the fire, one of the Apache men stood up and moved toward her. His eyes were intense, scanning her face for any sign of threat. She dismounted carefully, gently lowering the injured man to the ground. The Apache warrior who had approached her knelt beside him, his expression unreadable. He reached out and pulled the injured man's head back, his fingers brushing the blood-soaked hair away. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the man turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "You have saved him," he said in a low voice. "But do you know who you have saved?" Sarah shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The Apache man's expression softened, and he leaned in closer. "You have saved the leader of our tribe." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The man she had saved was the leader of the Apache? The man who held the fate of their people in his hands? She looked down at him, her mind racing. He had been unconscious, but now she understood why no one had come to help him. He was more than just a warrior. He was the heart of the Apache people. And somehow, she had saved him. But what did this mean for her? What would the tribe expect of her now? Her mind was spinning as the leader's eyes fluttered open, his gaze locking onto hers. "You have done more than you know," he whispered. "You have saved not just my life, but the future of our people." The Apache leader's eyes locked onto Sarah's as he slowly regained consciousness. His gaze, sharp and intense, held a quiet authority, yet there was something undeniably vulnerable about him as he lay there. Sarah stood over him, waiting for any sign of recognition. She had saved him, but she still had no idea who he truly was. The air was thick with tension as the other Apache warriors watched in silence, waiting for their leader to speak. His voice, when it came, was deep and steady. "You saved me," he murmured, his words carrying a weight far beyond the simple statement. "And in doing so, you've tied your fate to mine." Sarah blinked, not fully understanding what he meant. She had only done what anyone would have, She couldn't just leave him to die in the desert. "I don't want anything from you," she said, her voice steady but her heart racing. "I just did what was right." The leader's lips curled into a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "And that is why you've earned my respect," he said quietly. "But you've also earned something more." Sarah frowned, trying to make sense of his words. The Apache warriors around her exchanged looks, some of them nodding in agreement. One of them stepped forward, his expression stern yet respectful. "You have saved our chief, our leader," he said in a deep voice. "For that, you will be honored by our people. But you must also understand, there are consequences to your actions." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I didn't do this for honor or for reward," she added quickly, wanting to make it clear that she didn't expect anything in return. "You may not have done it for reward, but in saving our chief, you've proven yourself," the warrior continued. "Our tribe does not forget such deeds." The leader, now fully awake, slowly sat up, wincing at the pain in his side. "You are now bound to us," he said softly, looking directly at Sarah. "Your fate is tied to the Apache people. You will be welcomed among us, but you will also bear the weight of our honor and our laws." Sarah's stomach tightened. She hadn't expected any of this. She had thought her actions would be nothing more than a brief moment in time, but now she realized they had set something much bigger into motion. "I never wanted to cause trouble," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to help." The leader looked at her with a mix of understanding and something deeper, something she couldn't quite place. "By helping me, you've done more than you realize," he said, his voice steady but laden with emotion. "You have saved not only my life, but the future of our people." Sarah's mind raced. She had no idea what this man's words meant, but the gravity in his tone left her with an unsettling feeling. "What do you expect from me?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The leader paused for a moment, as if considering her question carefully. "Nothing," he replied, "except for your loyalty and your understanding of the bond we now share." Sarah wasn't sure if she fully understood, but the way he said it felt important. She had saved him, yes, but this was more than just a simple act of kindness. It felt like a turning point in her life, one that would have far-reaching consequences. "You will stay with us," the warrior said, his tone final. "You will learn our ways and live by our code. And in return, we will protect you, as we would one of our own." Sarah stood still, trying to process the gravity of what was being said. She had gone from a lone rider, trying to escape the noise of the world, to being thrust into the heart of a people she knew little about. The Apache tribe, their laws, their code, and now, their fate was tied to hers. I don't know if I'm ready for this," Sarah admitted, her voice wavering. "I never asked for any of this." The leader's eyes softened slightly. "None of us ever do," he replied quietly. "But fate is not something we control. It is something we honor." Sarah swallowed hard. She wasn't sure what had led her to this moment, whether it was pure chance or something more. But she had made her choice when she decided to save the Apache leader. And now, that decision would shape her future in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The chief's voice broke through her thoughts. "Rest, for now," he said, gesturing to the camp. "Tomorrow, we will speak of this again." Sarah nodded, still trying to process everything. She had no idea what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. And in the days to come, she would discover just how deep the bonds she had forged truly ran. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Sarah was awakened by the soft whisper of wind through the trees. She had slept fitfully, her mind racing with the events of the previous day. The Apache leader, now a man she couldn't stop thinking about, was alive, and somehow, she was tied to his fate. She had saved his life, but the weight of his words lingered in her mind, heavy and pressing. She had become part of something much bigger than herself. As she stepped out of the small tent that had been set up for her in the Apache camp, she noticed that the warriors were already awake, moving quietly but with purpose. They were preparing for something. Sarah hesitated, unsure of what to expect next. The leader, still recovering from his wounds, was seated by the fire, his gaze distant as he watched the warriors ready themselves for the day. His presence commanded respect, even in his weakened state. Sarah approached slowly, her footsteps careful on the rough ground. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly, unsure if he would even hear her. The leader turned his head slightly, his eyes locking onto hers. "It is," he replied, his voice low but steady. "But there are things we must discuss." He gestured for her to sit beside him, and she did so, nervously wiping her hands on her trousers. "I know this is overwhelming for you," he said, his gaze softening as he studied her face. "But I need you to understand something. By saving me, you have earned a place in our tribe. That is not something we take lightly." Sarah nodded slowly, absorbing his words, though her heart still raced with uncertainty. "I didn't do it for a place in your tribe," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." The leader studied her for a moment, then spoke again. "The right thing often carries consequences." He looked over at the warriors preparing to leave, their movements swift and precise. "We are going into bandit territory," he explained. "The ones who ambushed me and left me for dead are still out there. We must make sure they do not threaten us again." Sarah's eyes widened at the mention of bandits. She had heard stories of raiders who terrorized the land, but to think that she was now involved in something so dangerous made her stomach twist. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice tinged with both fear and curiosity. The leader's eyes met hers with a steady gaze. "You will stay with us," he said simply. "We will protect you, but we also need your help. You have proven yourself resourceful. Your presence here is no longer just a coincidence." Sarah felt a knot tighten in her chest. She hadn't come here looking for a fight, but it seemed that the fight was now coming to her. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The leader looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something else in his eyes, something like admiration. "You will help us move through this land unseen," he said. "You know the land better than we do. We will need you to guide us, to help us avoid the traps and pitfalls that could mean our end." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She was being asked to do something she had never imagined herself doing. But at the same time, she realized she had no choice. She had crossed into their world, and now she had to stand with them, or risk losing everything. "I'll help," she said, her voice steady now, though her heart beat faster than ever. The leader nodded, his expression unreadable. "You are brave," he said, "but bravery alone will not be enough. We will need trust." Sarah met his gaze, her breath catching in her throat. Trust. It was a word that held more weight than she realized. She had already put her faith in these people by saving their leader, but now she had to prove her loyalty in ways she had never imagined. The leader stood up, his movements slow but determined. "Come," he said, extending a hand to help her rise. "We leave at first light." Sarah took his hand, her mind still spinning with the reality of what lay ahead. She had no idea what kind of danger they would face in the coming days, but one thing was certain. Her life had changed forever. She was no longer just a wanderer in the desert. She was now part of something much larger, something that would require every ounce of courage and strength she had. As she followed the leader and the warriors into the heart of the bandit territory, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the true test was just beginning. She was about to learn just how far loyalty and bravery could take her, and whether she was ready to face the consequences of the path she had chosen. The following day, as the first light of morning began to spill over the rugged landscape, Sarah stood by the campfire, her thoughts swirling in the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The Apache warriors, strong and focused, were preparing for the journey into the heart of bandit territory. The leader, still moving with a careful grace despite his injuries, gathered the men around him, issuing quiet instructions in a language Sarah didn't fully understand. But she could feel the tension in the air, the weight of something far more dangerous than just a simple raid. She had agreed to guide them through the land, but now that the moment was here, the reality of what she had committed to began to settle in. She could feel the raw wind against her skin as she mounted her horse, her muscles tense. Her body ached from the previous day's ride, but there was no time for rest now. The leader's voice called out to her, firm but not unkind. "Stay close," he ordered, his eyes locking onto hers for a moment. It was a command, not a suggestion. She nodded silently, gripping the reins tightly as she followed him into the desert. The warriors, one by one, set off, moving in perfect coordination. The air was dry and hot, the earth beneath them cracked and parched. As they rode through the sparse landscape, Sarah kept a keen eye on the land ahead. The days spent in the desert had taught her to read the subtle signs of the terrain, the direction of the wind, the shadow of distant mountains, the faint trail of dust that lingered from the bandits' past movements. The leader rode beside her, his silence more profound now. He no longer seemed like the wounded man she had saved, but a commander, leading a group into uncertain danger. There was no room for hesitation. The bandit territory was notorious for its treachery. Sarah knew this stretch of land well, its dangers, its secrets. The bandits who roamed it were ruthless, preying on any traveler unlucky enough to cross their path. The leader's gaze remained ahead, but Sarah could sense his awareness of every movement around them. She had seen him fight, seen the power in his hands, but now, there was only quiet determination. She had no idea what kind of man he had been before, but she knew that he carried the weight of his people's survival on his shoulders. Hours passed, and the group came upon a narrow pass, a natural choke point in the desert where the wind howled and the earth seemed to stretch endlessly. Sarah's heart began to race, knowing that they were nearing the most dangerous part of their journey. The bandits knew this land, and they knew how to trap their prey. She kept close to the leader, glancing around nervously as the other warriors tightened their formation. The silence between them grew, a heavy, almost suffocating air that made Sarah feel more exposed than ever before. "This is where they strike." The leader finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper against the desert wind. "They've set their traps here." Sarah nodded, her pulse quickening. She had warned them about the danger of this pass, but now that they were here, there was no turning back. "We need to move quickly," she urged. "If they're waiting for us, we'll be sitting ducks in this pass." The leader glanced at her, his eyes scanning the terrain ahead. Then, without a word, he nodded and signaled to the warriors. The group moved with practiced speed, riding through the pass in a formation that had clearly been drilled into them. Sarah felt the tension in her chest rise as they moved deeper into the narrowing pass. Every turn, every shadow, felt like it could be the last. The leader's presence beside her was a steady anchor, but even he couldn't predict what lay ahead. Suddenly, a noise, sharp and jagged, echoed through the pass. A trap was triggered. A barrage of arrows came flying out from the hidden rocks, and Sarah instinctively ducked, gripping the reins with both hands as her horse reared. The Apache warriors reacted immediately, pulling their weapons from their sides and returning fire with deadly accuracy. The leader shouted an order, his voice cutting through the chaos. Sarah's heart pounded as she struggled to keep her balance, her eyes scanning the cliffs for any sign of movement. The bandits were closing in. She could see them now, hidden in the rocks above, their faces masked by scarves. They moved swiftly, efficiently, attacking without warning. Sarah's mind raced, trying to calculate their next move. "Stay close," the leader barked, his voice commanding as he pushed his horse forward. The group fought back fiercely, the clash of steel ringing in the dry air. Sarah followed the leader, riding at his side, her heart racing in sync with the pounding hooves. She had to trust him now. She had to trust that he knew the land better than she did. The battle raged on, each moment stretching longer than the last. Sarah fought to keep herself together, blocking out the chaos around her. Her role in this had shifted. She wasn't just a guide anymore. She was part of their fight, part of their survival. And somehow, through the smoke and chaos, she felt something she hadn't felt before, a sense of belonging. They had come for her, but now, she was fighting for them. As the bandits retreated, their numbers thinning, Sarah and the Apache warriors pushed forward, riding hard through the pass. The leader, though injured, remained at the front, never faltering. He had led them through the trap, and now, he led them into their future. The weight of his responsibility was clear. He had saved her life once, and now, she had saved his. And in that moment, Sarah realized that the bond between them was stronger than either of them had known. They weren't just surviving the desert, they were surviving it together. The days following the ambush were filled with a quiet intensity. The Apache warriors moved with purpose, their silent eyes scanning the desert landscape as they rode in formation. Sarah had become part of their rhythm now, no longer just a guide, but a member of the group, trusted and accepted. The leader, though still recovering from his wounds, remained at the front, guiding them with a calm authority that was impossible to ignore. Sarah noticed the respect he commanded from the others. It was clear now that he was more than just a warrior. He was the heart of his people. They rode for miles, the desert stretching endlessly around them, but there was no sign of the bandits who had attacked them. It was as if the land itself had swallowed them whole. Still, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She couldn't explain why, but every time they stopped to rest, her eyes darted to the horizon, scanning for any movement. One evening, as the sun set behind the jagged mountains, the leader called for a halt. The camp was set up quickly, the warriors moving with the precision of soldiers. The crackling fire was the only sound that filled the air, and even that seemed to fall silent as the leader approached Sarah. His eyes were serious, his usual calm demeanor now replaced with a quiet urgency. "We're close," he said softly, his voice carrying an unspoken weight. "Close to what?" Sarah asked, her heart racing in her chest. The leader glanced around at the camp, ensuring that the warriors were occupied before he spoke again. "The heart of their territory. We will strike before they have the chance to gather their forces." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was saying. The bandits wouldn't be caught off guard again. The next move had to be decisive, or they risked losing everything. The leader moved away, but Sarah felt his words linger in the air, pressing against her chest. She had seen the dangers of this land, but now, she understood them in a way she never had before. The Apache had their code, their honor, but the land was unforgiving. It didn't care who you were or what you stood for. It only cared if you survived. That night, Sarah lay awake, her mind swirling with thoughts of what would come next. The leader's quiet strength had given her a sense of safety, but she knew the truth. There was no safety in this desert. Only survival. As the hours passed, she found herself staring up at the star-filled sky, wondering how much longer they could keep running, or if running would even matter when the time came. The next morning, they set out again, their path now clear. The leader, his face shadowed by the hood of his cloak, led the way, his eyes sharp and focused. The warriors followed closely behind, their weapons ready, their faces unreadable. Sarah kept her distance, still trying to find her place in this new world. They traveled for hours, moving swiftly, and as the sun climbed higher in the sky, the land began to change. The rocky desert gave way to a more verdant terrain, small patches of grass and brush breaking through the earth like tiny pockets of life. It was here, in the midst of this desolate beauty, that they came across a hidden camp. The bandits. They were waiting. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as the leader signaled for the group to halt. The warriors moved into position, their bodies melding into the terrain like shadows. The leader turned to Sarah, his eyes locking onto hers with a quiet intensity. "Stay close," he said once more, his voice low. She nodded, her stomach tightening as she took her place behind him. The air was thick with anticipation. They were close now, closer than they had ever been. The bandits hadn't seen them yet, but it wouldn't be long before they did. The leader's eyes were fixed on the camp, calculating their next move. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the adrenaline starting to surge through her veins. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was part of this battle. She could feel it in her bones. The leader's hand rose, and in that instant, everything changed. The warriors sprang into action, moving with a speed and precision that took Sarah's breath away. Arrows flew through the air, and the clash of metal against metal rang out across the quiet landscape. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she moved with them, her instincts guiding her through the chaos. The leader fought beside her, his presence a constant reminder of the bond they had forged. The bandits were fast, but the Apache were faster. And as the battle raged on, Sarah found herself fighting not just for survival, but for something more, something she couldn't yet fully understand. When the dust settled, the air was heavy with the smell of smoke and blood. The leader stood tall, his face etched with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with something else. Determination. They had won, but Sarah knew that this was only the beginning. The battle for survival in this harsh land had only just begun, and she was no longer just an outsider caught in the storm. She was part of the tribe, bound by the choices she had made and the consequences that followed. The leader's gaze met hers across the battlefield, and for the first time, she saw the full weight of what he carried. She had saved him once, but now, he had saved her. And in that moment, Sarah understood. The bond between them was unbreakable. They would face whatever came next, together. The morning after the battle, the camp was eerily silent. The Apache warriors were tending to their wounded, their faces set in grim determination as they worked in unspoken unity. Sarah had never seen such resolve. Even in the aftermath of bloodshed, there was no time for mourning, no time for hesitation. Only survival. The leader, though visibly injured from the fight, moved through the camp with quiet strength. His presence was a steady anchor, guiding the warriors as they prepared for the next move. Sarah, still trying to comprehend the whirlwind of events that had thrown her into this world, watched him with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. He had led them into battle, and now he would lead them forward. But where, exactly, was he taking them? Her mind raced as she stood by the fire, her hands gripping the reins of her horse. The leader approached her, his expression unreadable. "We leave at dawn," he said, his voice low but firm. "There are more of them. We need to move quickly." Sarah nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. More bandits? She had thought that their victory had meant something more, but now it seemed that the danger was far from over. The leader's gaze softened slightly as he saw the worry in her eyes. "Do not fear," he said quietly. "We will be safe." Sarah wasn't sure whether it was his words or the way he spoke them, but something in his presence calmed her. She had seen him fight, seen the power in his movements, and for the first time since meeting him, she allowed herself to trust him. As the day passed, the warriors moved swiftly, dismantling the camp and packing what they could carry. Sarah worked alongside them, though she still felt like an outsider in this strange new world. She wasn't sure what her role was anymore. She had saved the leader, but now that the immediate danger had passed, she felt lost. She had thought that helping him would be enough, but now she understood that her place in this tribe was far from certain. As they rode into the late afternoon, Sarah kept close to the leader, following his every movement. He was focused, his eyes scanning the horizon, always alert. She admired his composure, but she also couldn't help but wonder what haunted him. Was it the responsibility of leading his people? Was it the weight of knowing that his survival meant the survival of his tribe? The questions swirled in her mind, but she didn't voice them. Instead, she rode in silence, trusting him to guide them through the unknown. They traveled for hours, the desert landscape stretching endlessly before them. The air grew colder as night began to fall, and the sound of their horses' hooves echoed against the vast emptiness. Sarah's body ached from the long ride, but she refused to stop. She had made a promise to herself and to the Apache people. She would not falter now. As the stars began to appear in the sky, the leader slowed his horse, signaling the group to stop. The camp was quickly set up, the warriors working with quiet efficiency. Sarah dismounted, her legs stiff from the journey, and moved to the fire, where the leader was already seated, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. He looked up at her as she approached, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Come," he said, his voice softer now, "sit with me." Sarah hesitated for only a moment before walking toward him. She had spent so much time avoiding getting too close, but now, in the quiet of the desert night, she found herself longing for his company. She sat beside him, the warmth of the fire offering some comfort against the chill in the air. "You have done much for us," he said after a long pause, his voice carrying the weight of something unspoken. "But you must understand the path you are now on. It is not an easy one." Sarah looked at him, unsure of what he meant. "What path?" she asked. The leader's eyes were distant, as though he was seeing something beyond the fire, beyond the camp. "The path of the Apache," he said quietly. "The path of honor, loyalty, and sacrifice. You have saved me, and in doing so, you have bound yourself to us. There is no turning back now." Sarah felt the weight of his words, but she refused to let fear take hold. She had made her choice when she decided to save him, and she would stand by it. "I will not turn back," she said, her voice steady. "I gave my word." The leader nodded, as if he had expected nothing less. He turned to face her fully, his expression softening. "Then you are ready," he said simply. "Ready for what?" Sarah asked, her heart beating faster. The leader looked at her, his gaze intense and filled with a quiet resolve. "Ready to become one of us. Ready to fight for this land, for our people." His words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Sarah didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just a bystander in this world. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. She was part of something greater than herself now. And as the fire crackled and the desert wind whispered through the night, Sarah realized that the true test had only just begun. The days that followed were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Sarah rode alongside the Apache warriors, her heart still heavy with the weight of the leader's words. She had committed herself to their cause, but with each passing day, the reality of what that meant became clearer. They were no longer just survivors in the desert. They were a tribe, bound by blood and honor, and Sarah was now an integral part of that bond. As they moved deeper into Bandit territory, Sarah's role became more defined. She wasn't just a guide anymore. She was a protector, a fighter. Every time they stopped to rest, the leader's eyes would find hers, and there was an unspoken understanding between them. She had become a part of his world, and he, in turn, had become a part of hers. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, the leader called for a halt. His sharp eyes scanned the land ahead, and Sarah could sense the shift in the air. Something was wrong. The warriors immediately fell into formation, their movements swift and deliberate. Sarah's heart raced as the leader turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Stay close," he said, his voice low but filled with a quiet intensity. Without a word, Sarah nodded and mounted her horse, following him into the unknown. The warriors moved with practiced precision, their horses moving like shadows through the rocky terrain. Sarah kept her eyes on the leader's back, trying to keep up with the rapid pace. As they rode, the tension in the air grew thicker. Sarah could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about the future of the Apache people. The leader's eyes were fixed ahead, but there was something in his posture, something that told her he was preparing for a fight. She had seen that look before, the calm before the storm. They had been traveling for hours when they came upon a narrow ravine. The leader halted abruptly, his gaze sweeping the area. "They're close," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The bandits were near. The warriors dismounted quickly, moving with silent efficiency. Sarah stayed close to the leader as he surveyed the land. He turned to her, his eyes locking onto hers with a look of quiet determination. "Do not let your guard down," he said softly. "This is where they will strike." Sarah nodded, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She had known this moment would come, but the reality of it was far more overwhelming than she had imagined. She was about to face the very people who had tried to kill their leader, the very people who would stop at nothing to destroy them. As the warriors spread out, Sarah's mind raced. She had no training for this. She had no experience in battle. All she had was her will to survive, her determination to protect the people she had come to care for. She glanced at the leader, whose eyes were now fixed on the horizon. He was calm, controlled. She realized then that he wasn't just the leader of his people. He was a symbol of everything they had fought for, everything they had lost. His survival meant their survival. They had to win, and they would. The sound of horses' hooves broke through the silence, followed by the unmistakable rattle of gunmetal. The bandits had arrived. The leader's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. "Move," he ordered. The Apache warriors sprang into action, their movements swift and precise. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she followed them, her horse galloping with the others. The bandits were closing in, their figures now visible in the distance. Sarah could see them clearly now, ragged, desperate men, armed with rifles and knives, their faces twisted with malice. As the battle began, Sarah's body moved on instinct. She followed the leader's orders, staying close to him, keeping her eyes on the enemy. The warriors fought with brutal efficiency, their arrows striking true, their blades cutting through the air with deadly precision. But the bandits fought back fiercely, determined to hold their ground. The sound of gunshots echoed across the ravine, and Sarah felt a wave of panic wash over her. She had never imagined anything like this, never imagined the chaos and violence of war. But as she fought, something shifted inside her. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for the people who had taken her in, who had accepted her without question. She was fighting for a future that could only exist if they won. The leader fought alongside her, his presence a constant reminder of what was at stake. He was the heart of the Apache tribe, and his strength gave her strength. Together, they were more than just survivors. They were a force to be reckoned with. As the last of the bandits were driven back, the Apache warriors stood tall, their faces grim but proud. Sarah's breath came in ragged bursts, her body trembling from the exertion, but she felt a sense of pride rising within her. They had won, and they had done it together. The leader turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with a look of quiet gratitude. "You fought well," he said, his voice low but sincere. Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. She had proven herself, not just to him, but to herself as well. She had found her place in this world, a world she had never thought possible. And as the Apache tribe began to regroup, preparing to move forward, Sarah knew that the bond they shared was unbreakable. They had faced the storm, and together, they had emerged victorious. The days following the battle had been filled with a quiet tension that seemed to hang over the Apache camp like the weight of an impending storm. Sarah rode alongside the leader and the warriors, feeling the shift. In her role within the group, she was no longer just an outsider. Her bond with the tribe had deepened, and she could sense that the leader saw her as more than just someone who had saved his life. He had entrusted her with more responsibility, a trust she wasn't sure she fully understood. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, but there was a strength in the rhythm of their movement, a certainty in the way the warriors carried themselves. The leader's gaze was always scanning the horizon, alert for any signs of danger. The tension from the battle still lingered, and Sarah could sense that there was something more to their journey. They were not just traveling through bandit territory. They were moving towards something greater, something that would change everything. As the sun began to set one evening, casting long shadows across the desert, the leader called for a halt. The warriors dismounted quickly, their movements fluid and practiced. The air was cooler now, and Sarah could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Something was about to happen. The leader's eyes met hers as he approached, his expression unreadable. "Tonight," he said, his voice low but filled with quiet authority, "we face the true test." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What did he mean by that? She had seen the strength in the Apache warriors, but she had also seen their vulnerability. The land they were traveling through wasn't just hostile because of the bandits. It was a place that tested a person's very will to survive. "What test?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The leader's eyes softened slightly, though his face remained stoic. "The test of loyalty," he said, his voice steady. "We will see if you are truly one of us." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had fought beside them, stood with them in battle, but now, it seemed, she would be tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't sure what this test would entail, but she knew one thing for certain. She would not back down. As the fire crackled and the warriors gathered around, Sarah sat beside the leader, her mind racing. The sound of the desert night filled the air, but her thoughts were focused on the leader's words. The test of loyalty. What did that mean for her? Was she truly ready to commit to this life, to this people? The leader's voice broke through her thoughts. "You have already proven your courage," he said. "But loyalty is not just about surviving. It is about understanding what it means to fight for something greater than yourself. To fight for the tribe, for our way of life." Sarah nodded, though her heart pounded in her chest. She had always fought for herself before, for her own survival, but this was different. She was no longer just a lone traveler. She was part of something far bigger than herself. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that lingered in her chest. The leader stood, his silhouette outlined by the flames. "Follow me," he said simply. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the edge of the camp. Sarah hesitated for a moment before following him. The warriors had gathered around, watching intently, but it was the leader's presence that commanded her attention. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, but she kept her focus on him, trusting that he knew what he was doing. They walked in silence, the sound of their footsteps blending with the whispers of the desert wind. The leader stopped at a small, rocky outcrop, his eyes scanning the terrain ahead. Sarah joined him, standing beside him as he surveyed the land. "This is where we test loyalty," he said, his voice barely audible. "The land will show you whether you are one of us." Sarah looked out at the horizon, trying to make sense of what he meant. The land was vast and barren, but it held a certain beauty in its desolation. She could feel the challenge in the air, the call to prove herself not just as a fighter, but as a member of their tribe. The leader turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "This is where we must stand together," he said. "No matter what comes, we stand as one." Sarah felt a surge of determination rise within her. She had saved him, and now he was asking her to stand by him, to stand by the tribe. She had made a choice, and that choice had bound her to them. She wasn't just a wanderer anymore. She was part of their fight, part of their future. As the night wore on, Sarah felt the weight of the leader's words sink in. She was no longer just a stranger in their midst. She was one of them, bound by loyalty, by the land, and by the blood they had spilled together. The test of loyalty wasn't just about surviving. It was about understanding what it meant to belong. And as Sarah looked at the leader, standing tall and resolute before her, she knew that she had found her place, her true place, among the Apache. The test had only just begun, but she was ready to face whatever came next, with the tribe at her side. The air in the desert had grown thick with tension as the Apache warriors prepared to move out. The events of the past few days weighed heavily on Sarah's mind, but she had no choice but to keep moving forward. The leader, his presence a constant in her mind, had shown her the way. She had proven herself in the battle, fought beside them, and stood her ground. Now, as the group prepared for what lay ahead, she felt the weight of her decision settling deeper within her. She was no longer just a woman traveling alone. She was part of something far greater. As the sun rose that morning, the warriors moved with quiet purpose, mounting their horses and setting off across the vast desert. The leader, though still injured, rode at the front, his eyes scanning the horizon with the same intensity Sarah had come to admire. She rode beside him, her mind still churning with the knowledge that they were about to enter one of the most dangerous areas in the land. The bandits, once scattered and disorganized, were regrouping, and their forces were growing stronger. The Apache knew that they had to strike before the enemy did. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming their land, their honor, and their future. As they rode through the harsh terrain, the leader's voice broke the silence. "The time has come," he said, his voice low but steady. "We will take the fight to them. We will show them that the Apache are not to be underestimated." Sarah nodded silently, though she didn't fully understand the gravity of his words. She had seen their strength in battle, but this was different. This was about proving their right to exist, to live without fear. The group continued to ride through the barren landscape, the wind whipping past them. The journey was long, and the air grew colder as the sun began to set. The leader signaled for the group to stop, his eyes scanning the area. They had reached the edge of the bandit territory, and the time for caution was over. "Prepare yourselves," the leader said, his voice carrying a note of finality. "Tonight, we strike." Sarah felt her heart race. This wasn't just a battle, it was a declaration. They were going to face the enemy head-on, and there would be no turning back. The warriors moved quickly, setting up camp under the cover of the desert night. The fire crackled as they gathered around, their faces solemn and determined. Sarah could feel the tension building, but there was something else in the air too, something that spoke of a bond forged through shared struggle. The leader's gaze met hers as he sat by the fire. "You've proven yourself," he said, his voice steady and calm. "But tonight, you will need to trust us completely. This is the moment we've all been waiting for." Sarah swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had trusted him, had followed him through the worst of it. But now, with the night stretching out before them, the reality of what lay ahead seemed overwhelming. "I trust you," she said softly, her voice firm despite the uncertainty that clung to her like a shadow. The leader nodded, his eyes locking onto hers with a quiet intensity. "And we trust you," he said simply. The night passed in tense preparation. Sarah's thoughts swirled as she prepared for the fight to come. She wasn't sure what role she would play in this final confrontation, but she knew she would not hesitate. She had already chosen her path. The dawn of the next day arrived with a quiet stillness that settled over the land. The warriors mounted their horses, the weight of their weapons heavy in their hands. They rode out as one, their movements fluid and synchronized, like a single organism. Sarah rode at the leader's side, her heart pounding as they approached the bandit camp. It was just ahead, nestled against the cliffs, the smoke of their campfires rising into the morning sky. The leader gave a sharp signal, and the Apache warriors broke into action. They moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, surrounding the camp from all sides. The bandits, caught off guard, scrambled to defend themselves. The Apache struck without mercy, their arrows flying through the air and their swords cutting through the chaos. Sarah's heart raced as she fought alongside them, the sounds of battle echoing in her ears. The leader was a shadow in the midst of the chaos, his movements fluid and deadly, as he cut through the enemy with the same ease that he had led them. It was a battle like none she had ever known. There was no room for fear, no time for hesitation. She fought, not just for survival, but for the tribe, for the future they were carving out with their own hands. As the battle raged on, the bandits began to fall back. They were outmatched, their forces broken and scattered by the overwhelming power of the Apache. The leader stood tall, his face bloodied but resolute, his eyes never leaving the enemy. He had led them into battle, and now he was leading them to victory. As the last of the bandits retreated into the wilderness, the Apache warriors stood victorious. The camp was theirs, and with it, the land they had fought for. Sarah stood alongside the leader, her body trembling from the fight, but filled with an overwhelming sense of pride. They had done it. They had reclaimed what was rightfully theirs. The leader turned to her, his gaze softening as he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. "You fought with honor," he said, his voice low but sincere. "You are one of us." Sarah felt a surge of emotion rise within her. She had earned her place among them, not through words, but through her actions. She had fought for their future, and in doing so, she had found her own. The battle was over, but the journey was far from finished. Together, they had faced the enemy, and together, they had won. And as Sarah looked at the leader, standing tall beside her, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The days after the battle were filled with the quiet hum of preparations as the Apache warriors moved to secure their new territory. The bandits had been defeated, but the land still held dangers, wild terrain, unpredictable weather, and enemies that might be waiting in the shadows. Sarah had proven herself in the heat of the fight, standing side by side with the leader and his people, but now, in the aftermath, the true cost of their victory began to settle in. The leader's presence was as steady as ever, his determination unwavering. Yet Sarah could see the weight of leadership in his eyes, the burden of decisions that stretched far beyond the battle they had just fought. It was clear that the war was not over. They had taken back this piece of land, but the Apache had many more battles ahead of them. As they moved through the rugged desert, Sarah found herself not just surviving, but thriving in a world she had never imagined. She was no longer just a traveler, no longer just a bystander in the story. She was an active participant, part of the tribe, part of the fight. Every day brought new challenges, new lessons. The leader continued to train her, teaching her more about survival in the desert, about the land they called home, and about the code that bound them together as a people. She learned how to track the faintest signs of movement, how to find water in the most barren stretches of land, and how to read the stars to navigate their way through the endless night. The warrior's world was harsh, unforgiving, but it was also beautiful in its own way, and Sarah had found her place within it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of red and gold, the leader called Sarah over. The warriors had gathered around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. The air was cool, and the camp was quiet, but Sarah could sense that something was about to change. The leader's voice broke through the silence. "You have proven yourself time and again," he said, his voice deep and calm. "But now, you must make a choice." Sarah's heart raced as she stepped closer. "What choice?" "You have fought beside us, helped us reclaim what was once ours," he continued. "But your journey with us does not end here. You have a role to play in the future of the Apache people, a role that will shape the fate of our tribe." Sarah was quiet for a moment, trying to understand the weight of his words. She had known that her path was no longer her own, but she hadn't realized how deeply her decision would impact the tribe. "What role?" she asked, her voice steady but uncertain. The leader's gaze softened, and he nodded toward the warriors gathered around the fire. "You have seen the strength of our people, the unity that binds us," he said. "Now, you must decide if you are willing to stand with us, not just in battle, but in all that we face. Will you commit yourself to the Apache cause, to our way of life?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Sarah felt the weight of it pressing down on her chest. She had fought alongside them, but this was different. This was about a deeper commitment, a bond that would tie her to them forever. Sarah thought about the journey she had taken, the struggles, the victories, the bonds she had formed with the Apache warriors. She had come to care for them, to understand their way of life in a way she never had before. And now, the choice was before her. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about belonging. She took a deep breath and looked at the leader, her decision clear in her heart. "I will stand with you," she said, her voice firm. "I will fight for the Apache people, for our future." The leader's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something deeper in his gaze. Respect, pride, and perhaps even something like gratitude. "Then you are one of us," he said simply. The warriors around the fire nodded in approval, their faces hard but proud. In that moment, Sarah knew that she had made the right choice. She was no longer an outsider. She was a part of something greater than herself, something that would shape the future of the Apache tribe. The leader stood and motioned for the group to gather their things. The camp would soon be broken, and they would move out again, continuing their journey through the desert. But Sarah felt a new sense of purpose, a new strength within her. She was not just a follower anymore. She was a leader in her own right, bound by the same honor and code that had sustained the Apache people for generations. As the fire crackled and the warriors began to prepare for the next leg of their journey, Sarah rode alongside the leader, her heart steady and strong. She had found her place among them, and whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she was ready to face them, not as an outsider, but as one of the Apache. The days after Sarah's commitment to the Apache people were filled with intense preparation. She was no longer just a member of the group. She was part of their very fabric, their spirit, and their future. The leader had recognized her strength, and with that acknowledgement came a deeper responsibility. They continued their journey through the harsh, unforgiving desert, moving in silence, their every step calculated. Each morning, the sun would rise, casting long shadows across the land, and each evening, the cool desert air would settle in as the campfires flickered against the encroaching darkness. Sarah had learned to move with the rhythm of the tribe, following their lead as she continued to master the survival skills they had taught her. She could now read the signs of the land as they did, the subtle shifts in the wind, the tracks left behind in the sand, the direction of the clouds in the sky. Her body had become attuned to the desert, just as the Apache had. It was a bond, a connection to the land that went beyond mere survival. It was about respect, reverence, and understanding. But despite all the lessons she had learned and the bonds she had formed, there was still a nagging feeling inside her. She had made her choice, but now she was beginning to understand the gravity of that decision. The Apache lived by a code of honor that Sarah had come to admire, but it was also a code that demanded sacrifice. It wasn't just about fighting for survival. It was about fighting for what was right, even when it meant personal loss. The leader, though still burdened by the weight of his injuries, continued to guide them. His presence was a constant, a reminder of why they fought. He was more than a leader. He was a symbol of strength, resilience, and honor. Sarah often found herself watching him, trying to understand the depth of his resolve. He had survived so much, yet he never wavered. As they rode one evening, nearing the edge of another dangerous stretch of territory, the leader turned to her, his eyes narrowing as he studied her face. "You've come far," he said, his voice low. "But the real test is yet to come." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had fought beside him, stood by his side when the bandits had attacked, but she knew he was right. She had not yet faced the true test of her loyalty, the test that would prove she belonged to this people, that she had earned her place among them. "What test?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The leader's eyes softened, but there was still a hard edge to his gaze. "The test of leadership," he said. "The tribe needs more than warriors. It needs those who will guide us through the storm, those who will lead when the path is unclear." Sarah swallowed, her heart pounding. Leadership. She had never seen herself as a leader, and yet, here she was, being called to something far beyond anything she had imagined. "I don't know if I can lead," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. The leader smiled, a rare, fleeting expression. "You have already led," he said simply. "You led when you saved me. You led when you chose to stay with us. You led when you fought beside us. Leadership is not about titles. It is about the choices you make, the actions you take. You have already shown what it means to lead. Sarah was silent, her mind racing. She had never thought of herself as a leader, never considered that her choices could inspire others. But now, the weight of what he said settled in her chest. She had made a choice, and that choice had led her here, to this moment. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about the future, about the tribe, about the Apache people. She wasn't just a part of their journey. She was helping to shape it. The leader's voice broke through her thoughts. Tomorrow, we ride out again, he said. There is a battle ahead, one that will determine the fate of our people. But you are ready. Sarah looked at him, her heart steady now. She wasn't just following anymore. She was leading, in her own way. I am ready, she said, her voice firm. The leader nodded, as if he had known all along. The next morning, they set out before the sun rose, riding swiftly through the desert. The leader led them, but Sarah was no longer just following. She was part of the formation, part of the strategy, part of the fight. As they approached the bandit camp, she could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of what was to come. This battle would be unlike any they had fought before. It was a fight for the future, for the survival of the Apache people. And this time, Sarah knew, she was ready to face it head-on, not just as a warrior, but as a leader in her own right. She had earned her place among them, and now, she would prove it. The battle was fierce, but Sarah stood tall, her resolve as unyielding as the desert itself. She fought with everything she had, side by side with the leader, side by side with the Apache warriors. They had come far, and they would not be stopped. As the dust settled and the sound of battle faded, Sarah looked around at the warriors who stood beside her. They were not just survivors. They were victors, and together, they had claimed their future. The air was heavy with the scent of the desert as Sarah rode beside the leader, the weight of their victory settling in like the cool night air. The battle had been fierce, the bandits relentless, but the Apache had triumphed. The sound of galloping hooves echoed through the quiet landscape, and for the first time, Sarah felt the true depth of what it meant to be part of this tribe. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about fighting for something greater, something that bound them all together. The leader, though weary from the fight, rode with a quiet intensity, his gaze focused on the horizon. Sarah watched him, still trying to understand the man who had led them through so much. He was more than just a warrior. He was a symbol of strength, of the Apache way of life, and she had pledged her loyalty to him and to the tribe. They rode for days, moving through the harsh terrain with the same precision they had in battle. The land had become a part of her, a part of the Apache blood that ran through her veins. Sarah had learned more than survival here. She had learned to live as the Apache lived, to understand the land, the culture, and the sacrifices that came with it. But the peace they had fought for felt fragile, as if it could slip away at any moment. Every new sunrise brought with it the promise of new challenges. As they approached the next village, Sarah could feel the change in the air. The warriors were alert, their movements sharp and deliberate. The leader called for a halt, signaling for the group to dismount. Sarah did so, her heart quickening with the familiar tension that always followed a battle. The leader turned to her, his eyes serious as he met her gaze. "There is much to be done," he said quietly, his voice tinged with the weight of leadership. "The tribe must be united, not just in battle, but in spirit. We will need to ensure our place in the land." Sarah nodded, understanding the depth of his words. They had fought to reclaim their territory, but now the real challenge began. They had to build something lasting, something that could stand the test of time. The leader motioned for the warriors to gather, and Sarah took her place alongside him. As the tribe gathered around the fire, the leader spoke, his voice carrying across the camp. "We have fought for our survival," he said, his gaze sweeping across the group. "But now, we fight for our future. For the future of the Apache. We must unite our people, forge alliances, and rebuild what was lost." Sarah felt the weight of his words, the responsibility that came with them. This was not just about fighting battles. It was about rebuilding a way of life, a culture that had been torn apart by forces beyond their control. The leader looked at Sarah, his eyes softening slightly. "You have proven yourself time and again," he said. "But now, you will be tested in ways you never imagined. Our future depends on the choices we make." Sarah's heart raced, but she did not look away. She had come this far, and she would see it through. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that churned inside her. The leader paused, his gaze thoughtful. You will help lead the way, he said simply. You know the land, and you know what it means to fight for what's right. Now, you must help guide us through the next phase of our journey. We will need you to help us unite the scattered tribes, to show them that the Apache are strong, united, and capable of leading their people. Sarah felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She had never imagined herself in a position of leadership, never imagined that her decisions would shape the future of the Apache people. But she had come to understand the weight of their struggle, the importance of the fight they had started. She had chosen to be with them, and now she would stand with them through everything. I will do what I can, she said quietly. The leader nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a look of quiet gratitude. You have already done more than most, he said softly. Now, we must face the future together. As the fire crackled and the night settled around them, Sarah felt the full weight of what she had committed to. The battle for their land was over, but the real fight had just begun. They would need to rebuild, to forge alliances, and to stand united in a world that was growing increasingly uncertain. But Sarah was no longer afraid. She had found her place with the Apache, and whatever came next, she would face it alongside them. The desert had tested her in ways she never thought possible, but she had passed those tests. Now, the real journey began. With the leader by her side, and the Apache warriors standing strong around her, Sarah knew that together, they could rebuild their world and fight for the future of their people. The days that followed were filled with the rhythm of rebuilding. The Apache warriors moved with a quiet sense of purpose, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the desert as they worked to fortify their position. Sarah had come a long way since the first day she had met the leader, from a solitary traveler to a key part of the tribe's future. It was more than just survival now. They were fighting for their legacy, their way of life. The leader had entrusted her with tasks that, only a few months ago, she would have never imagined herself capable of. She had learned not only to survive in the harsh desert, but to lead, to guide. Now, with the Apache tribe steadily regaining strength, the time had come to take the next step in their journey. The winds had shifted. The night before, the leader had gathered everyone around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. His voice, though softer than usual, carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. The future of our people is in our hands, he had said. The tribes must unite. The fight for survival is no longer enough. We must rebuild, and we must do it together. Sarah had watched the warriors around her, each one waiting for their moment to act, each one eager to take on the challenge. She was no longer just a participant. She was a leader. That was what the leader had seen in her all along, even when she hadn't fully understood it herself. And now, as the tribe set out to forge alliances with neighboring tribes, Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility settling on her shoulders. The journey ahead would not be easy, but it was a journey that she had chosen, and she was ready. The next morning, they moved out with purpose, riding under the heavy blue sky. The sun, rising in its usual intensity, cast long shadows across the land. The warriors, once again, moved in formation, their steps synchronized in a way that only a tribe as ancient as the Apache could understand. Sarah rode alongside the leader, her thoughts focused on the future. There was a sense of calm between them now, an understanding that had been forged in the heat of battle, through the trials they had faced together. They had come so far, but Sarah knew that the journey ahead would be even harder. As they approached the first of the neighboring tribes, Sarah could feel the unease in the air. She had heard stories of these tribes, their customs, their way of life, but she had never imagined she would be standing before them, trying to convince them to join forces with the Apache. The stakes had never been higher. The leader turned to Sarah as they neared the camp. Remember, he said, his voice calm but firm. We do not ask for alliances out of weakness. We ask because we are stronger together. They will see that. Sarah nodded, her heart beating a little faster. I understand, she said, though her voice held the slightest tremor. The leader gave a slight smile, something she hadn't seen from him often. You will be fine, he assured her. The tribe they approached was smaller, but their warriors were formidable. They stood tall, their faces painted with intricate designs that told the story of their people. As they dismounted, the leader of the neighboring tribe stepped forward, his eyes sharp as he assessed Sarah, and the Apache warriors. The air was thick with silence, the weight of the moment hanging between them. "You seek an alliance?" the leader of the other tribe asked, his voice gravelly, but not unkind. The Apache leader stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "We seek unity," he said. "We fight for the same cause, our people, our land. Together, we will stand stronger than apart." The leader of the other tribe eyed him carefully before turning his gaze to Sarah, who stood by the fire. The silence stretched on, and Sarah could feel the weight of their scrutiny. But she held her ground, just as she had in battle. She had proven herself with the Apache, and now, she had to prove herself to them. Finally, the leader of the other tribe spoke again. "And what does this woman represent to you?" he asked, his tone curious. Sarah felt a pang in her chest, but forced herself to step forward, her voice steady. "I represent the bond between our people," she said, her words clear and firm. "We stand together, not because we have no other choice, but because we believe in the strength we bring as one." The leader of the neighboring tribe studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly he nodded. "You speak truth," he said. "Your people have shown their strength, and I see now that you are a part of that strength." The tension in the air eased as the two leaders exchanged a look of mutual respect. The alliance had been forged, and with it, the future of the Apache people grew brighter. Sarah stood tall, her heart swelling with pride. She had played her part, and now, the path ahead was clear. The journey had been long, but the real work was just beginning. With the Apache tribe and their new allies united, they would build something that would endure, something that would protect their way of life for generations to come. And as Sarah looked at the leader, standing beside her, she knew that this was just the beginning of their story. Together, they would face whatever came. Next, stronger than ever.